Welcome back to Next Gen Console Watch 2020, our new show following all the news and rumors on the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X. I'm Damon Hatfield, and I'm joined this week by Ryan McCaffrey. He hosts IGN's Xbox podcast, Unlocked.
Howdy.
And Jonathan Dornbush. He hosts IGN's PlayStation podcast, Podcast Beyond.
Hey there.
And this week, we're going to start off talking about all of the interesting and sometimes strange patents that Sony has been registering that could be features that we end up seeing on the PlayStation 5. None of this has been confirmed, but these are real patents that Sony has registered, which indicates they are at least thinking of incorporating these features into the PlayStation. Let's start with the newest and arguably most strange one. This is for a patent for an autonomous robotic gaming buddy or companion that sympathizes with the user and reacts to their emotions during gameplay. The patent depicts the robot as a fuzzy little guy who sits next to you on the sofa while you play games. The robot could play games with you. For example, he could be he could control the opposing team in a baseball game. The patent reads, "It is expected that the user's affinity with the robot is increased and motivation for playing a game is enhanced by the robot viewing the gameplay next to the user and being pleased or sad together with the user." Jonathan, what do you make of this? Does this sound like something people would want?
I mean, I personally constantly need feedback and support. So exactly. So someone there being in step with me exactly as I play would be perfect. No, this is definitely, of all of their patents, probably the most out there. We talked pretty extensively about it actually this week on Podcast Beyond, and it is one of those ones that I think would probably be pretty good for a moment like right now that we're all living through. But if this does ever come to fruition, I think the appeal here would largely rely in probably mostly geared toward either kids and younger players who maybe can't always have friends over to play with them, or maybe not be allowed to play with friends online as much, but having a buddy there telling you like, great job, or maybe being your opponent in a game might be something that could be beneficial to their playtime and their development there, as well as maybe for people who just can't have friends over either because they're physically distant or because they have very small apartments or homes. And so to have this with you there might be a comforting thing to have, but it is definitely, of all their suggested tech, one of the weirdest use cases I've seen.
Yeah, Ryan, what was your reaction to this? And in light of the Kinect experience, do you think Microsoft would be a little more hesitant to introduce sort of gimmicky accessories like this?
Yeah, I think Kinect sort of put the last nail in the coffin for Microsoft doing anything but focusing on core gaming for quite some time while they try to win back that core gaming audience. But yeah, it is a little ironic that Sony, who's arguably best known for creating narrative-driven, single-player focused video games,
right,
would patent this idea of a fuzzy robot buddy to hang with you on the couch. But I say, hey, why not? I mean, why not? If it's fun and it's an interesting way to connect, as Jonathan mentioned, particularly younger players to certain games, why not? Have fun with it.
Well, it really is interesting just how many patents Sony has been registering recently. In addition to your robot buddy, there's a patent for a biofeedback mechanic. It's an accessory that can attach to a PlayStation DualShock controller and sense the player's biometrics, such as heart rate or even sweat. There's a patent for a controller that includes the back buttons on the back. Like there's an accessory out now that adds back buttons to the DualShock controller. This patent is for the controller with that built in. There's the one for the AI tool that will help you play that we mentioned several episodes ago, where if you're stuck in a game, the AI will look at what other players did to beat the boss or get past that level and suggest them to you and may suggest microtransactions. And then there's one for content sharing features, a feature called scene tagging, which is a way of automatically generating metadata for gameplay videos and screenshots created by players. This one is particularly interesting. And then, Jonathan, what do you think could be used for this, especially considering the DualSense controller has a create button instead of a share button?
Yeah, I think seeing the addition of create instead of share on the DualSense speaks to probably the ethos we're going to see PlayStation attack this next generation with. And I really like the ideas behind this patent and the possible like real applications of it. It actually really reminds me of, this is a strange comparison, but when Google Stadia was first revealed and they did that big showcase, one of the features they touted that still hasn't really made it to that service is the idea that you could essentially create a URL or a pinpoint for anywhere you are in a game and share that URL, and then people would be able to immediately then dive into that game at that point with your save build. And I really like the idea of that, and this scene tagging essentially sounds a little bit similar, where if you're maybe stuck in a game, you could see someone's exact playthrough of that little bit of the game, whether it's a puzzle or a boss fight, based on the tagging around that. You could maybe even jump into their save and then push past that boss or play through it the way they did. The patent sort of mentioned people being able to experience the way someone uploaded that tagging. So theoretically, we're seeing some sort of sharing of save files here. I think that's a really great accessibility move. You know, some people may love a game but get stuck on a particularly frustrating puzzle or a boss or just one part of a game that irks them, and this allows you to not really be burdened by 2 minutes of a game that you otherwise love the other 40 hours of. So I see a lot of really good positive applications for this. And if this is actually the intent of the create button, I think we're going to see a lot of exciting use cases for that.
Well, the patents don't even stop there. There was a patent for new PSVR controllers and a new way to reduce load times, which is interesting because the PS5's SSD is already supposed to virtually eliminate load times. What's that one all about, Jonathan?
Yeah, so essentially, if you look back to the Mark Cerny discussion that we broke down a few episodes back, he's talked a lot about, and this patent sort of is akin to that idea that a lot of the way that systems currently load in games has caused developers to have to put in smart ways to mask loads, and that's why we have so many hallways or crawl spaces or elevators in gaming. And the idea is that the way that the PS5's custom-built SSD will pull in game data, it will really allow developers to not have to build those actual parts of a game into the gameplay so that players don't have to worry about that. And the system is smart enough to be able to pull in bits and pieces of a game quickly and on the fly and load things in so that players don't have to experience that themselves on the, front end actually playing of a game. And I think that will mean a lot on the development side. And we'll have to see, obviously, developers get used to having those tools and being able to do that more often than they could on the PS4 or, even the PS3 cell architecture. But I think we'll hopefully see the results of that go through as, even in the first couple of years, because that's been something Cerny and Sony have really pushed for, is load times won't really exist, is the hope.
So when you look at all these patents, it kind of seems like Sony is really trying to think of different ways that they can push the boundaries with next-gen gaming, introduce new gaming mechanics and features. Ryan, how does that strike you that we don't really see a lot of this coming out of Microsoft?
Well, not currently, but yeah, like I said, I really think that Kinect scared them away from investing a lot of time and energy and resources into these kinds of things. Not to say that these Sony patents and ideas are bad ideas at all, but Microsoft's sole focus over the last few years has been trying to reclaim the power narrative and say, hey, we're a super powerful console. We're the most powerful console. Here's all the we're going to transparently tell you exactly how we're doing that and the tools we're giving to developers. And that's good. And my hope is that some of these cool Sony ideas do come to fruition, because we can always use more good ideas in games. It doesn't, Microsoft just needs good games, whereas Sony has had that for years now. And they have, I think, the luxury of being able to devote more of their brain power, quite frankly, to thinking outside the box like this, whereas Microsoft's really had to narrow in their focus. And at the end of the day, we're going to get a super powerful Xbox Series X and hopefully a great PS5, and we'll see which, if any, of these ideas end up actually making it to market, and we'll go from there.
Well, dear viewers, which of these ideas, which of these Sony patents seems the most interesting to you? Do you want a little robot buddy to play games with you on the couch? Do you want to use scene tagging to search for gameplay help from within your game? Make sure to vote in our new poll on IGN.com, and we will share the results with you next week. Let's move on to a follow-up from a previous episode when we actually reached out to a bunch of analysts asking if they thought the next-gen console launches might be delayed due to the ongoing pandemic. And what they told us was that delays aren't super likely, but console shortages are a very real possibility. And now comes a new report from Bloomberg this week that sort of confirms that, and actually reports that Sony is limiting its production of the PlayStation 5 on purpose. And the reasoning for that apparently comes down to its higher price tag compared to the PlayStation 4. The report notes that Sony anticipates the PS5's price to come in at around $500 to $550, a figure the company thinks could put off some potential buyers in a launch year. Jonathan, how do you respond to that? A lot of IGN users have voiced complete comfortability in spending $500 on the PlayStation 5.
Yeah, and I'll spend it if that's what it's going to cost at the end of the day at launch, as someone who's really dedicated and wants to see what this new generation can bring. But I totally understand that fear that a wider mass audience may not quite feel the same way. And the Bloomberg report hints that essentially we may see as much as a few million units difference in the first few months of production between the PS4 and the PS5. And in my mind, that makes absolute sense, because at the end of the day, they want this thing to look like it is a success. And so if we're, 4 or 5 months into sales and they had virtually the same amount of production as the PS4, but they weren't selling as many, saying, hey, we have 2 million of these PS5 sitting in warehouses waiting to be bought, is a much worse look as a PR move than saying, hey, we are selling out, even though they don't sell as many. Being able to tout that your console is popular, is hard to find, is selling out, is something they would likely want to do than say it's too easy to find. So I think that totally makes sense from a business perspective.
So would you say they only want to make as many as they think they can sell?
Yes, yeah. Ideally, yeah. They want to be able to hit that target.
Well, then, Ryan, if Sony is worried about a 500 or 500 plus price tag, should Microsoft also be worried about that?
No, honestly, I don't think they have as much of a concern here for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, they have the Lockhart console, the so-called Xbox Series S, the lower-priced next-generation console that will sit alongside the Series X in Microsoft's next-generation console lineup. We still don't have the details on that. Word on the street is we might start hearing about that officially soon. But in any case, they've got that to fall back on, so they can say, hey, even though the economy is a little tough right now, if you still want to get a next generation Xbox experience, you can jump in here with us on the Series S/Lockhart if that's the way you want to go. And then with regard to the Series X, Damon, you'll remember we had Phil Spencer here, virtually here, as we're all virtually here now, a few weeks ago. And he emphasized to us that Microsoft is staying agile on their price. We specifically asked him about price, both here and on my longer interview with him on Podcast Unlocked that same week. And Phil had said, hey, we're staying agile on price. Then Phil said, I've got the backing of our CFO, meaning Microsoft, not the Xbox division, the Microsoft CFO and CEO, to be nimble on the price. So I actually think there is an opportunity here for Microsoft to potentially come in, and I think they were already prepared to, at worst, match the PlayStation 5 in price, but possibly beat it. And so I think they could use this opportunity with Sony intentionally throttling back production a little bit and thus sales, for them to, Microsoft could jump in and say, all right, let's go for the throat here. We really have a golden opportunity to pick up some market share. Let's undercut the PS5 and say, hey, we got a more powerful box and a lower price to boot. Come on into our ecosystem, and they could really stand to gain some new people to the ecosystem in a much quicker way than they might have anticipated.
I think that Microsoft is also playing a very different game going into this next generation than Sony is, at least from what we've seen. But you can even, tying it back to the patents, Sony seems to be trying to go for something different and try to offer something new, whether or not all these patents are part of it. Whereas Xbox seems to be playing the game of they want you into their ecosystem. It's okay if you're not buying the most expensive hardware, if you're buying the less powerful hardware, if you're playing Xbox Game Pass on PC, if you're playing on an Xbox One, they want to get people into that ecosystem. And so I totally agree with Ryan. I think they are going to try to gain as much market share as they possibly can from the get-go, because they just want to get you in the door.
All right, before we go, let's take a look at the results of last week's poll. We asked you, which of our predicted launch games do you want the most? Choices ran from a Batman Court of Owls game to a sequel to Horizon Zero Dawn, even Halo Infinite. And the rumored Batman Court of Owls game came in first place with 25% of the vote. A sequel to Horizon Zero Dawn and Halo Infinite were sort of neck and neck in the second and third places there. So way at the bottom of the list, Call of Duty Black Ops 5 with less than 2% of the vote. So sorry about that one. That will about do it for this edition of Next Gen Console Watch 2020. Thank you, Ryan and Jonathan. We'll be back next week, next Friday at 6 a.m. Pacific, 9 a.m. Eastern with more news and rumors on the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X. We'll see you then.